Welcome to another episode of the Business Maverick Show. Today we've got change guru Ket Patel here to talk about everything change. Okay, so if the exec are a bit blind to it, maybe not hearing the right messages coming through, maybe willfully blind, whatever you want to call it, let's go down a layer. Let's go down to the sort of the managerial level, shall we, the middle layer of management.
Yeah.
Sometimes badly called the frozen middle.
The frozen middle.
but let's not call them that today. So what about that level? Are they? You mentioned there the sort of maybe there's a lack of honesty and transparency upwards. Maybe they're not in the kind of culture where that would be allowed, or I've learned to keep my head below the parapet kind of thing. What's happening at that middle layer when it comes to change? Because sometimes as well we need to think about they sometimes lose out. They sometimes lose things as part of change, right? Sometimes it's like, well, we're going to do a big change. We're going to put everyone up from 6 DRs to 8 DRs, which means we can get rid of 30 of you.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh wow, okay.
Well, I mean, that's where I spend most of my time, if I'm honest. When we're working with organisations, the biggest challenge is the line manager, middle manager, who's got a day job and a team to manage. And this big change, they have to try and somehow rationalise in their mind, get themselves sort of aligned to, deal with not knowing everything, and then manage the communication and enable their team to do that, right?
That's half the information as well.
With half the information, right? So that's where I think change management has its most value at the moment, is in that support of middle managers trying to execute change, trying to create that that friction that the organisation created by its own means of scaling between the bit that's stable and the bit that's trying to change all the time. Insert in the middle change managers to sort of make that a little bit more fluid, a transition of an idea into reality. That's where I see us spending most of our time. But again, if you go back to that kind of why, it's because at some point the mindset is, I'm here to protect doing stuff in a repeatable, predictable fashion, and you're telling me to do stuff I don't know what you're asking me to do most of the time, and then when I do, I don't know how I'm going to do it because I don't have the capacity, and now I've got to explain it to my team. That is asking a lot of someone who's not been developed to deal with that kind of change. So mentally, psychologically, change managers are being that psychological sounding board for them, and then figuring out where their pain points are, and then providing practical solutions for them. But they're not really upskilling them for the next one. Not at least not all change managers are. And I think that's a big important point of like, go into an organisation, upskill that middle layer, and you'll have a very different organisation if they hold on to that knowledge.
I think that's a really key point. Congratulations, Tina. You're now a people manager. We're going to put you on a course to teach you how to do one-to-ones, and we're going to teach you on a course how to do your performance appraisals, and we're going to put you on a course to do Management 101. Where's the change management course, right? If you're in the people business, you're in the change business.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's it's almost like the missing chapter of how to do management, and so many people are ill-equipped to do that.
And I mean, I've been on a little bit of an exploration with a sort of colleague who's sort of big into coaching, has been doing leadership coaching for a while, recently wrote a book, Organisational Change and Coaching, and it was aimed at change managers, and we were talking, and I was just saying, do you know what the thing is? It's great that we upskill change managers, but in a way it's sort of, change managers kind of, in most cases, they need to be a bit more coaching in their style. This is great as a book because it gives them all the tools, but imagine if we turn this a little bit to focus more on how do we enable line managers to understand a little bit about how they themselves deal with uncertainty, how they themselves deal with like complexity and change. From a personal perspective, if we took that one step further and said, well, how do we get them to be coaches to their employees so that they can help them navigate and manage uncertainty and complexity and all that kind of good stuff that comes from change. And then if we gave them tools that allowed them to manage that within the context of their organisation, all of a sudden they become very different catalysts in the organisation. They become people who are the networked individuals that can make change happen because they understand their own reaction to it. They've got an idea about how it will react or how their teams will react to it. and they've got a set of tools that can help them manage down and manage up. And we've been exploring this. I've done a couple of different posts around sort of what is a line manager's biggest challenge. We're doing a LinkedIn Live coming up in the next few weeks where we're going to just talk about what was fed back to us. But I'm really convinced that a way an organisation will start to become more change ready. I think we talked about this example. Like, I imagine an organisation is a group of starlings. I don't know if that's the right phrase for a group of birds, but a flock, that's the word I was looking for. Like starlings, and one moves and they all move in unison. Murmuration, that word is beautiful. And I imagine that is what is arguably possible, that if an organisation faced a change and all the line managers were sort of inherently ready and skilled so, then naturally when a change came, it would be less of a fright or flight moment, right? And that for me is a really interesting concept to explore. And you're right, I think learning and development for managers has fundamentally missed the point. But that's mainly because we've tried to separate organisations into these two halves. I also joke, like my wife for years has always said, project management and change management are made up disciplines. I'm like, you're literally doing something on my grave, right? But okay, I kind of see where you're coming from. She had a really bad experience actually on a project where she was this SME and the project manager just kept coming to her. Knew she was busy, but just kept coming, I need this deadline, I need this done, blah, blah, blah. And she just found it like so difficult to cope with because she had no time for it and her manager wasn't supporting her in saying there's a trade-off to be made here. Do that or don't do this or put that at risk. And it's only recently that I've gone, I think she's right. I think the notion of having change in project managers in most organisations is an outcome of creating this division of the way we think about change. And if we thought about change differently from the way we start an organisation, maybe we wouldn't need as many, or actually the skills would be inherent in our people. So it's a bit of a leap of a sort of moonshot type thing that I think you could build different organisations, but I think it starts in that middle, like the middle manager is a sort of key, and we just don't give them the right tools and support.
So I love that concept of maybe we don't need project, or even the presence of project managers and change managers is we're treating the symptom, not the cause.
Yeah.
Right. So if we had the middle managers understanding how to do change, you wouldn't need project managers and change managers. Yeah. Which is what your wise point was, which I think is a really interesting point.
Don't tell her that.
No, I know. Oh God, cut that bit.
Yeah, cut that out.
But yeah, maybe we're all out of a job. If we get this right, but wouldn't that be a good thing?
Well, when I asked a load of people about this, I said the likelihood of this actually happening. How many companies are there, right, that exist already? We're basically asking every new company that starts up today to think like this. They're not going to. So every company that starts up today is already falling into the old trap. And what we're doing is we're sort of putting our finger in a massive dam, but there are holes appearing everywhere, and it's just going to come. We've got to figure out a better way of approaching this at a strategic level from a profession. And that's the bit that's really interesting is I think as a profession, we'll support what a client needs because a client's got a problem and we've got solutions to them. But we also at the same time need to be really challenging their understanding and their desire to move up in terms of not needing us in the future and maybe using us for other things, more strategic thinking, because I think that's the thing, like that level, if you get that change is needed at various levels and you want to empower your line managers, that doesn't mean you don't need people who can think about strategic change. You do, right? You really do need to think about it because then all of a sudden the problem becomes even bigger. It's like sort of, okay, what's the environment in which we're operating in? What are some of the things we can't predict? What do we want to do about new markets we want to get? All of a sudden you become a bit more of there's a term that's been coming up quite a lot, business architect, and I've not heard it much, and I've heard a few people sort of refer to themselves as that, and I kind of went, maybe that's the direction strategic change managers who are caught in this cycle of just going to one client, going to the next, need to be aiming for. Where's the career progression for them? If
the capabilities is built within your line management and middle management layers, then maybe you just need a change orchestration, right? Maybe a change conductor, because fundamentally you'll just get little local optimizations breaking out, and someone needs to pull them together to go, we're all going in this direction.
And I think there's, the ideal would be, well, I say the ideal, that what you might end up with if every line manager understood change like a change manager did is you would not need them, but the reality is then there's part of their day job that they wouldn't probably be doing, and they wouldn't need that. So there's a balance, there's a flex to be had. There's a need for some, because organisations are optimised for different outcomes, and it's that, like, the assumption is we must have change in project managers because we've built an organisation this way. Build it differently and you might not need them, but make that choice. Don't fall into it because that's what everybody else has probably done before you.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about the exec layer. We talked a little bit about middle manager layer and where we could direct those in a different way in an ideal organisation. But let's think about the employee level, people at the coalface. Quite often the recipients of change or participants of change.
Yeah.
They go through all those kind of emotions and whatever else. What are we getting right in that space, and what are we getting wrong in that space, the coalface?
I think when we do it right, we're honest, right? We're honest about the fact that the change is going to ask them to work differently, or that we won't need as many people, or we're expecting you to reskill and focus on other things, right? Like, that is part of being in an organisation, is that you do continually evolve your skills. Like, I think it's gone.
These days, right?
Yeah, it's gone are the days where perhaps you sit and do the same job for 15, 20 years, right? And again, that's the advent of organisations wanting to modernise and have new technology and new opportunities appearing. So that openness and the support to help people move through that is where I think sometimes we can get it right and we can get people on board. But where we get it wrong is where we kind of silence that. We kind of see it as naysaying, resistance. It's just I hate that word really, because it's just unhelpful really. Like, it's loaded, people use it as a bad thing. And, even in training I see 6 common types of resistor. Do we really, 6 common types of frustration people feel?
Yeah, that's a bit of a
That we could deal with better is very different to saying, look, here are some common types of resistors. So I think our framing needs to change, but I genuinely see, like, when we have that dialogue with people who are directly impacted and we're honest with them, it's still awkward, right? Like, if you do have to downsize or you do have to radically change the work you do, then it's not nice to have to confront that. But we can do it sensitively and we can do it supportively, and I think that's where the balance of getting it right is always in that conversation.
Yeah, it's we've seen all sorts, haven't we? There are people who go, oh gosh, we're all going agile, are we? And some people go, yeah, but you know what, I'll give it a go. I'm curious enough to go, what's all the fuss about? There's other people who've gone, yeah, we tried that 3 years ago, didn't work then, won't work again. Yeah. Or other people just go, I just don't want to be part of this.
Yeah.
It's interesting, I'm talking to one of the transformation directors for ING Bank, which is sort of the poster child of banking agile transformations. And they said what we didn't tell everyone was we took 1/3 of the people out. He said we should have taken 2/3 out.
Wow.
So he said, we did find a cohort who wanted to do it and were motivated to do it and capable of doing it, but there were a lot who weren't, and that was part of their journey that they went on. But it is interesting, isn't it, that I think I've always found it best when one of my attitudes has always been keep people busy, right? So get them building the future. I mean, one of the approaches we use here at S&S is very much a case of, especially with new ways of working, we try not to talk about like loads of design and, there's 3 people in a room and in 6 weeks they'll come out with a new design of how you're going to work. It's like, you don't know my problems, right? Yeah. But actually, we very quickly get them into a new working environment with different people, and it's the same kind of thing of how do you nurture a plant. You never try and manage it by shouting at it, and I mean, what you do is you create a great environment around it, sunlight and nutrients and water and things like that. So you create a new environment and it's really interesting how quickly they can become quite engaged in it and start to be part of building the future. Yeah. And of course, then they become the biggest champions of it, right? And want to talk to their friends in the canteen and stuff like that, and you start to get that sort of viral effect going across an organisation. But I think sometimes I've seen it too many times, this sort of very rational approach to change where, I'll talk, you listen, we'll do comms, we'll do training, we'll do PowerPoint. and it can work on very simple things which are aligned to everyone's values. We're going to give you a 2-hour lunch break on Wednesdays. Great, that'll work fine. Try and change someone's way of working that way. It just does not happen, right? And so you have to take that much more coaching view. I mean, we take a much more normative approach, which sort of says we're not here to tell you what to do. We're going to work alongside you, and we're going to examine the system in front of us, all those things that is the organisation, the culture, the policies, and the people. Right. And we're going to discover things by doing that. And when we discover things, people become much more open to change. Yeah. Right? They go, gosh, why does that take 6 weeks to get from there to there? Yeah. That's ridiculous. No one ever intended that. We go, yeah, what would you do to change that? Well, what we do is take that bit out because that's not, you take that, and we could get that down to 2 days. Yeah. And they're like, oh, yeah, when could you get that done by? And suddenly everyone's energized in the work. So there's a big piece, I think, around we sometimes don't involve people early enough, and then therefore is a big shock. I know something's coming. Oh, here comes the PowerPoint, right? Here comes the town hall, right? Rather than going, actually, let's get some of you involved early. And when people get involved and want to be part of the solution, they like to talk to their colleagues about it.
Yeah, and you said there's so many things in there that we sometimes get right, sometimes get wrong. I think that co-creation piece is important. And not using our voice as sort of like change agents, right? Like we find them in the organisation, we give them a platform, we get them to lead the discussion with their peers, and we give them the space to have that, like, here's the goal, now go and figure it out amongst you, and we'll facilitate, we'll kind of help steer you in the right directions with the right things. But what we won't do is present the solution, because we don't know, you guys know. And that's really empowering. So it's a bit frightening sometimes for people, because you're like, well, actually, you want me to come up with the... But the moment they start talking, I ran a workshop where we had like 5 different departments coming together for a service process, and none of them, they all had an opinion on somebody else. They all had an opinion around what the other teams were doing wrong. And it was interesting to hear them individually talk about the problems they saw in the other departments. But when you put them together and said, my job here is to describe the process end to end, and I kind of knew in advance where the pain points were going to be, where they were going to pick out, and said, like, by the end of today, I'd like it if we've drawn up the process as you guys see it, you've got to come to an agreement, and the points in which you think an agreed improvement could be made. And at the end of the day, they walked away having done that work themselves, and they were ready to present back, say, these are the things we should invest. Like, the goal was improve the end-to-end service delivery. The how was not defined. And that was, it's almost eye-opening that in one day you can get a bunch of teams together. It's almost like a hackathon type thing, right? Yeah. Give them a problem and they will figure it out. But the problem is we try to figure it out for them and go, accept that, will you? And of course, no one really wants to do that because they kind of want to have some part in it. Yeah. And I think the other thing you said, which I think from the flip side, we're not strong enough on, is one, I remember it, I think it's Dr. Jen Fram who wrote this, and I don't know if she saw it from somewhere else, but said, if you can't change the person, change the person. And I do think sometimes an organisation is there to have an impact on the wider society, to produce profits, to do all these things. So there's a balance of what the organisation is trying to do and the people that are there to do it. And sometimes those are disconnected because of the change or because of the way you're set up. And it might be it's not right for you anymore. It might be that you're not right for that anymore. We don't have those conversations. We kind of try to force everybody to accept this new way of working and think that everybody should accept this change. Well, sometimes people won't, and some people will naturally move on. So actually factoring that into your program is sometimes helpful. I did a program where we were offshoring operations teams in Europe to a low-cost centre, and young groups of people all going to, move on to different roles because that role wouldn't exist. But it was happening over such a long time that the attrition, the turnover you would normally get 10 or 15% would have meant you would have been down to half in the time we would have delivered. Yeah. And actually the work we needed them to do in helping establish this sort of centre of excellence couldn't be underestimated. We kind of were sending people out in groups of sort of 5 to go out and work for 3 months in this new area to set stuff up. They were young people looking for an opportunity. And it was like, how do you get that optimum? What's in it for you? What do we need out of it? How can we make sure that you're looked after, but we both get what we need? And even if that at the end of it, it means we go our separate ways, just being honest about it. And we didn't go naturally into that. I remember setting up a workshop with all of those people that were impacted and said, I want you to just have a discussion amongst yourself. I didn't facilitate it at all. It was a car crash. Because they just moaned about everything. And you know, like you've got one or two dissenting voices and they riled everybody else up, and it was a very, very tense week after that. But then I realised that, you know, some people have more stake in this than they're letting on, and they want others to have that same stake. So also understanding where the energy is in that group and actually using it to your advantage and recognising that person wants something out of it, it's really important to do right. And it's not always done right, it's always left to chance most of the time, right?
Yeah. What about the concept of purpose or trying to find meaningful work in your day? There's a couple of times we've been into organisations where people have been in teams doing stuff, and they just, I don't know, there was this real lack of motivation. I mean, they weren't working in a particularly effective way at all, but it was really interesting when we started to bring these people together, and we took one of the whole walls and we pulled out the whole value chain, right? So that everyone could see their space in it. And at the end, so this was a big system which does essentially countrywide payment systems, right? So you could see this whole value chain of, you know, where everyone's involved in this, you know, the dev teams and the testing teams and, you know, everyone across the whole thing. And at the end, we put an infographic with the stats for this system.
Yeah.
This was a system where £7 trillion a year goes through this. And it's had a 4-minute outage in the last year.
Right.
I mean, it was just, you know, we had all these stats on this infographic, which was just like, this is absolutely world-class system. And it was amazing how, when they looked at it, were like, oh God, there's me. I'm part of this. Yeah. And they completely lost sight of that. They completely lost sight of what they were doing and how important. It was critical national infrastructure. Essentially, 80% or 90% of salaries got paid every single day through this system, right? I mean, if it broke down, or you got a proper outage or something like that, or you put bad change in, I mean, it would be horrendous.
Yeah, the knock-on effect must be huge.
And so helping people find meaning in their work or purpose in what they do as a team, I find is really important during change, because we are sometimes just, well, you're in that team now, and here's the bit of work you've got to do, and when you finish that, here's another bit of work for you to do, and it's like,
I think it's easy to make it such a big thing, like everyone must have purpose in their work, because I think that's the danger. If you don't feel purpose in your work, are you somehow not doing it right? But I do think you're right, like making people aware of how their role affects the organisation and its criticality. Everyone's role is critical, otherwise why have it, right? So I don't think we do enough of that in the discussion of change. Like it served a purpose, it needs to change, it's still critical. This is what we're going to do different. This is the opportunities we need as an organisation, and this is why you're central to it. And your skills and your development. The challenge is, I've found this in my career, different personal pursuits, you know, different things going on in my life means my passion for my works has gone in various sort of ebbs and flows. And so you've got to take that into account. Not everyone is going to be like, I love my job every time. Yep. So we've just got to work, again, with, want a better word, you know, the energy people are bringing to the change, some of their gripes, get people that are genuinely interested, want something out of it, a role. Those that don't, try to make sure that they're not disenfranchised by it. Yep. And it's I mean, the thing is, this all sounds like a lot of work, but it's just, for me, it's just doing good management of your people. And your business is your people, right? Like it is all these processes, and it is what everybody buys your products for. But none of that would exist if it wasn't for the people coming to work every day. So kind of doing right by them is just, you know, just a good business activity. And I think we've kind of lost sight of that a little bit because it's become a machine, right? We've just got to get more and more done and, you know, be more productive and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I think anytime we can inject that balance and bring some purpose to people that need it, and, you know, not worry about it if people don't, I think is a big opportunity that we can take advantage of. And again, I think consulting organisations like S&S and the many that are out there that focus on business change they do that. And that's the value add, is like you make people feel valued in the role they do and you get the change done. It's not either or, which is what the falling into the trap is.
Yeah. Yeah, there's an old term I like, which is the change is the work.
Yeah.
Right. So don't treat the change as side of desk. I'll get around to it if I've got time from my day job. Or the other time I like to ban from any work like that is, I've got a day job.
Yeah.
It's like, no. There's change is your day job as well.
Yeah.
Right. Improving is your day job. So.
And actually, that, if I could, one of the things, both for line managers and for employees affected by change, I do think, unless someone's going to say to you, you've got X more people, which no one is, right? What you are able to do is say, here's all the stuff I'm doing. There's the stuff you want me to do. That's more than the capacity I have. So I'm going to put at risk and I'm going to mitigate. So this is sort of a bit of a process tool. Job 1, job 2, job 3, going to mitigate. Like if that does happen, this is what we'll do, and show that to people. And that way it says, like, I'm not just focusing on the business as usual. I will try and do both, but know that if push comes to shove, I'm going to do this, and the risk is that. What I've seen when people do that is 9 times out of 10, they're like, I want to do this stuff. And there is a bit of a risk here, but people are okay with it. And funnily enough, the risk doesn't really materialise because people want things to work out in both sectors. But what happens if you don't have that conversation is people just wed themselves to this. Whether there's going to be a risk or not, whether there's going to be a problem or not if they take on more work. They just go, this is what I get paid to do, this stuff is new, I'll protect this. And I think that change has to introduce a level of risk to what you're doing today, and it has to be acceptable. And it has to be managed. And if you don't use that as a tool to manage up from an employee manager upwards, then you are missing a trick to say, I'm happy to support this, but it's at this cost. And I think that is a practical thing people should be doing at that level.
Blimey, so we seem to have covered quite a bit. What's good and what's bad around change management and the sort of industry. We've talked about the exec team, we've talked about the middle layer of management, we've talked about the frontline people. We've decided that project managers and change managers are just made up jobs, apparently.
Totally made up.
Yeah. But we've also
which we're thankful for.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Well, make yourself redundant, that's the ideal situation. But I think there has been a sort of theme of trying to drive inherent capability within an organisation, isn't it? If you have a change capability or change readiness within your organisation, this is a lot bloody easier than the kind of, we'll do some projects, we'll do some big programs. Quick, let's get some change management in because we forgot about that. We'll do it in the last 2 weeks before we go live. So, how would you summarise it? Where are we as an industry? I mean, I look at some of the change methodologies from 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, and thank goodness they're moving on. I still think they've got a way to go. And I think, we talked about the sort of, I think you raised a really good point, which is that sort of organisational coach kind of way of doing change, which I think is fantastic. Yeah. Where's the industry, and where do we need to go in the next 5, 10 years?
I think what we're doing is really important. We're getting our voices heard and people are taking note. So we've got to carry on doing that. I think the other thing we need to be doing more of is starting sooner, and not just at the exec, but at people, the future employees of every organisation. The idea of how you manage change for yourself, I think, is quite fundamental when you go into an organisation, because you're confronted with all these different aspects that you've got to learn. No one really teaching you any of it. And if a line manager doesn't get taught about change management, you can certainly guarantee employees aren't. So it feels like we need to widen the discussion and make it more accessible. Like, change management is a functional capability, but it's also a personal capability, the thinking that goes into it. And I think that, for me, is where we as a profession could be doing more, certainly at the kind of university stage, maybe even like career. I don't know how you found, I think we talked about this. How did you find change management? I found it after 10 years of doing lots of other stuff, looking at how organisations didn't manage change well, knowing that there was probably a better way. And I think, how many people do we lose out because they never actually discovered that there is a different way of thinking about how organisations deliver change? They kind of just fall into that trap. So I think that, for me, is personally, where I'm spending a bit more time focusing on how do you get that message out sooner, that change management, project management, they're important disciplines currently in organisations, and that there are valuable kind of routes of entry to kind of a professional life. But also the thinking that goes into it is just helpful generally in life, in my opinion. Yeah.
And I wonder, so it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, my background was a scientist for about 14 years, so doing R&D, then big projects and programs, but I was also a bouncer for 7 years. So,
I remember you saying.
so actually that's where one of my passions for really understanding people came from.
Yeah.
Because it's really interesting to be able to read people and work out whether someone's really serious, or how upset they are, or whether there's whether it's calm and cool and maybe they're the most dangerous person. It's a slightly different example from in organisations, but it was an interest in people and where that comes from. Then sort of big projects, some of which were highly successful, some of which weren't so successful. What went wrong? How can we do that better next time? That kind of continual learning mindset. But I wonder then if I mean, I'm Gen X, so we don't talk about our feelings at all. But I wonder if millennials and Gen Z and stuff like that, I wonder if they're inherently more conscious and aware of feelings, and whether they actually could be tapped at the right time earlier to think about how they personally change, and that would help organisations change as they go through. It might just come through generational change.
It might just come through generational change, and I hope, and it will. I think we could accelerate it if we can reinforce the message it's important. Because what I wouldn't want to happen is that they recognise it, like most of us change managers probably recognise it when we came into organisations and weren't called change managers, and we went, oh, that's just the way it is. And then years later, right, we kind of went, no, it doesn't have to be this way. Whereas perhaps what I'm seeing in quite a lot of sort of more junior or entry-level professionals is they get this stuff, and they've always sort of got this stuff, and they're not going to take that it's always this way, and they will challenge stuff a little bit more, and they'll be respectful about it, and they'll ask questions, and they'll be more exploratory than just go, I want to do it a different way. So I think we need to encourage what's already happening to kind of accelerate on that. But if we don't, what will happen perhaps is that it will just take a lot longer to get there. Yeah, that for me is kind of where I think there is a natural change happening, but we've got to put opportunity to accelerate it.
Okay, so to summarise, the children are our future.
Children are our future. Who sung that?
And essentially, project managers and change managers have made up jobs.
Yeah, and I'm not even going to... I won't even try and explain the contradiction that I want to get more people into change project management. But yeah, I don't think it exists. That's a whole other episode.
It's still necessary for the moment, I think. Yeah. I think there's a few years left.
That's exactly it. Yeah, exactly it.
Fantastic to have you. Really good conversation.
Cheers. Thanks a lot. It's been a long time waiting, but yeah, great to have it.
Cheers, Ket.
Thanks.